final product wasn't necessarily a representation of the entire journey, because there was lots of stuff on the blog, there was lots of conversations in classes, there were lots of things. So we kind of felt like, even though that the final product was a PSA, that there was all kinds of other things along the way that didn't necessarily get summed up and evaluated with a rubric that were as meaningful as the PSA. Well, and that idea of a portfolio would actually be a great way of doing this, where the PSA is one part of the portfolio in the process. The summaries that you've done at the end of each week, commenting on the feedback that you received, the sort of pulling out exemplars of what you feel were your best feedback that you gave, and then that way it's more in keeping with what Daryl had mentioned earlier, was that the PSA is not just, it isn't the only thing. You know, you could do this and this and this and this, and again, it's sort of shotgun approach again. So yeah, it is, and I think that's where we need to really be specific when we sit down before we do it this year. And the big thing that I always struggle with is the assessment part. I love big ideas. I love talking to kids. Then assessing what they've created, for me, is where I struggle. Does what I wanted to achieve, is it reflected in the rubric? That's, I don't know. The problem is that this rubric looks at one specific piece of the project.
Yeah.
And I think what we realized after the project was done was that evaluating the entire project with the PSA wasn't fair to the project. Well, and I think in hindsight, if I was to evaluate, I think I handed over too much to the students, and I think this year I'll need to rein it in a bit and sort of say, these are the things I specifically need, and not just hope and pray that they will hit them.
Well, and I think the problem was, though, we showed them exemplars of the PSAs,
right,
and asked them
to make an effect.
How do you evaluate a PSA?
Yeah.
Rather than how do you evaluate
the scientific content of.
There was lots of opportunity during the blogging for students to provide feedback to each other. The thing that I found really interesting was that students didn't always, when they made their PSA, when I looked at their blog and the information that they had on their blog and they had gathered, they didn't use what I would have considered to be their strongest evidence. One of the things that I just found was really frustrating was that when I watched their blog, or I watched their PSA, I was disappointed because I felt that they had more evidence, there was better logic, there were better statistics, there were better gems.
So they demonstrated their understanding far better on the blog.
And then when they came to showcase it in the PSA, they didn't use the.
So the PSA wasn't.
No.
Sounds like the right.
No,
task.
It wasn't. No, and the problem was that it could have been, if maybe I had another chance to provide them with feedback. And that's the sort of struggle that we came up with, and we talked about this, was, well, what if I marked yours and you marked mine? Because I have a whole lot of other baggage. And if we're just marking the PSA and not the prod, it was really sort of hard for me, because I know those students and I know how hard, and I wish that their PSA was stronger than it was, because I know the work that went into it, and I know the validity, and I know the stats that they had, and they didn't necessarily showcase their blogs to the best of their abilities, in my opinion. Somewhat disappointing at the end to go, oh, that was great, but it was way more than just that. And I think that's why it made me realize that, okay, I need to find some other way of assessing it or showcasing it or summing it all up or pulling it together. And I think a portfolio and focusing more on the process than the product. And again, it became the battle between the bottom four on the rubric and the top one. Yeah. Where the top one was the one that we wanted to focus on, the content, the facts, the stats. Yeah. And the visual mechanics, that the bottom part was the PSA part. A lot of students really took a really mature approach, and I was, in that whole idea that they looked at all the different facets and they were able to sort of balance things out, whereas they didn't, take the easy route or ignore them because it was too hard to justify or to explain them. And that was the part that I really, really liked with the product, with the the blog and the PSA and everything, was sort of seeing them all weave them. Purpose for me was to look at, well, what is my practice, to reflect on my practice, to modify my practice, to make sure that my alignment between what did I want to achieve and what did I achieve, and making sure that they were in line. And what I found from this project is they weren't. Like what I wanted to achieve and what the students achieved, but I missed a whole bunch in the middle. You know, and I knew I was missing a bunch, but now I know how I'm going to prevent that. How I'm going to prevent from missing those opportunities next year. And basically not only that, but every time I do an assignment, whether it's science or math, making sure that there's all those little bits of assessment along the way.